Welcome to the Microburbs podcast, where we bring suburb data to life. Learn from top industry experts, the best places to live, invest and grow. And now on with the show. Hello everyone, welcome to the very first Microburbs podcast. I'm very happy to have everyone here, whoever is listening. I guess the first podcast is always the one that you compare to subsequent ones when production values get way better. We're just going to have a very open and honest conversation. So my first guest is Robyn Vogels from Personnel Relocations, who has a wealth of experience in relocating people to Australia. She's got a huge amount of international experience. This is obviously a very interesting area now where COVID is opening up again, and I'll be very interested to hear what kinds of people are coming, what are the post-COVID requirements, how are people liking moving to Australia in the work from home era, breaking up the market. I think there's going to be a lot of very interesting tidbits here. I've spoken to Robyn before, and it was just part of my inspiration for this podcast was that there was just so much interesting stuff. Why not share it with a larger audience? It applies for everyone, not just Luke and Robyn. So welcome to the podcast, Robyn.
Hello, Luke. Thank you so much for having me on. And I think when you talk about inspiration, likewise, and I think you and I could, go down a few rabbit holes with all the migration statistics and the way the world is moving and people moving. And I know you've got a keen interest in it as well. So thank you for having me on. And I certainly appreciate it. And I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Absolutely my pleasure. And being a podcast format, we can go down rabbit holes.
Yes.
We can create sections. So people can jump. So hopefully in post, you'll be able to see sections, like if you're watching this on YouTube, so that, and we'll break it up into bits and get a transcript out so that people can drill down to the area of interest. We're both busy people, and so the production values might not be 100%, but hopefully that's made up for by the fact that we do interesting stuff when we're not podcasting.
I was just going to say, it was certainly one of the things I wanted to ask you is how do you sleep? Because for the amount of information that you must have in your head and processing of information, and then trying to make decisions at the end of the day of how to use that information, I do wonder how you sleep at night.
Yeah, I don't sleep the best, actually. Yes, so there's always a lot of things going on in the old brain. So not always, I don't think late at night is the best time to be worried about problems, particularly if you're lying in bed. Yeah. But yes, there is certainly, it's a very interesting world. There's a huge amount of data. By most people, by the time they see this, the new Microburbs would be out there.
That's
and
exciting.
I'd be happy to run through that with you today, Robyn. This is like a sneak peek.
I'd love that. I would absolutely love that. I'm probably a bit of a nerd when it comes to Microburbs. Great.
Yes, Microburbs brings a lot of interesting people out of the woodwork, people who are curious, and I'm interested in developing a community and having people like yourself also be able to access our community and provide useful services.
Absolutely. And there's so much information that you've already been sharing in the migrant space, and I'm interested to understand how migrants are possibly impacting Australia. But yeah, and I think for you and I, it's a case of, what is AI telling you and what am I being asked in the real world, and we could probably debate for hours on those topics.
Oh, yes, a very big subject that I'm sure I'll be covering a lot in this podcast, and it would touch migration as well. Yeah, so do you want to start with a bit of a background on yourself, how you came to be where you are now, your international experience?
Sure. So I brought up in South Africa, for those that are trying to place the accent. I left in my late 20s already, but the accent has stayed with me.
That would be the English Afrikaner accent, yeah? Not the Afrikaner one.
Not the Afrikaans, no. Yeah. Although in my day, we still did both languages. Now there's 11 official languages in South Africa, but at school you had to pass English and Afrikaans. So I can speak Afrikaans, although it's very rusty now, but I can still speak Afrikaans just because you didn't actually move to the next grade unless you passed Afrikaans.
Yeah, right. I understand Afrikaans is a bit of a Creole language, so it's a bit easier than Dutch.
I think yes, yes, it definitely is a lot easier than Dutch. It's probably not as harsh a tone as Dutch is. I can hear somebody speak Dutch and I can pretty much follow what they're saying, but I can't talk back to them, so that's not really helpful. But yeah, so I was born and bred in South Africa. Moved to England and I spent 9 years in England, did a lot of moving around England as well, just through my husband's work. Both my children were born in England. From there, we moved to Singapore. Singapore was meant to be a 3-year gig, but 9 months later, we moved over to France, and France was a different mindset. France was supposed to be a forever job, and my husband was going to settle there, and I would call it terminal. We were moving to France and it was terminal. I wasn't going to be leaving. But the France way of life was very different to our way of life and our culture. So we looked further afield to Australia and moved to Australia when the kids were probably 8 and 10 years old. So 2008, we moved to Australia, and I've been here ever since and absolutely love it. And both the kids have left home now and independent, and I feel like I've been a good parent. They've left home.
Very good. So you've been able to leverage your own personal experience to help others?
Absolutely, yes. So I pretty much started Personnel Relocations from my service department just 6 weeks after arriving. And that was purely because the relocation companies that were here at that time, none of them had moved internationally. And I didn't feel that they had the empathy, if you like, for somebody who's moving and leaving family and packing suitcases in those last few weeks. So I actually started it from there, not really knowing much about Melbourne myself, but I thought it was a good idea, and that I had something to give. And so pretty much took off from there. Been doing a lot of corporate relocations, a lot in global mobility for corporates who perhaps don't have their own global mobility section. But over the years, I've actually learned how to project manage a relocation from start to finish, and working with the removalists. So that's been quite interesting for a lot of global mobility companies, a lot of international companies, that I can do their full global mobility from A to Z for a client, including the airport transfers and a bottle of champagne if necessary. So yeah, that's been interesting. And that led me to writing the book, Your DIY Move Guide to Australia. And the book really came from the amount of stress that migrants are under and how they don't necessarily recognize that stress. So we worked both with the physical move on how to move your things and not get ripped off, as well as the mental baggage, if you like, of dealing with that and understanding how and when and what to do with family members and make sure everybody settles in comfortably, basically.
Yeah, so like with general real estate, this is something of a transactional business. All of these services associated with making the move, so you don't have the ongoing relationship. So it's important to have people that can help you through that journey.
Absolutely.
Very different to your local butcher or your optometrist. I understand optometrists are the most respected profession.
Really?
It was certainly one of them. So
yeah.
They give good service. Obviously, you're going to keep coming back because people lose glasses.
So
yeah, very important service. I've certainly seen, like in the real estate data space, that people will pay much more for someone like a buyer's agent than they will for data, because that, as you point to, the emotional needs that people have, they need someone to actually walk them through the journey, make them feel comfortable.
Absolutely.
So yeah, what does client contact look like? So when do you engage with them, and what sort of support do you provide throughout the process?
Over the 15 years that I've been in the business now, it's really evolved. Early on, you really had the client in the car with you going out and looking at properties and looking at suburbs, whereas now we're moving more to finding people rentals before they arrive. So there's a lot more pre-arrival managing their expectations and preparation. And that's been a really successful part of the business. And although I started doing it pre-COVID, during COVID, it is what kept the business alive, to be honest, because there were a lot of people that didn't want to be flying around the States or, from Melbourne to Sydney or vice versa. But perhaps for work reasons or change of scenery, they were moving house. So we were able to support a lot of people in their move by doing the rental inspections for them, and they don't have to fly interstate. So that's been a really good part of the business. But we can be talking to anybody a year in advance, sometimes 2 years in advance. I literally did an orientation for a family pre-COVID, and they've only just moved now. But then at this time of year in January, we get a lot of people. January is our busiest time. We have a lot of people who move for the start of the school year. And I have people phoning me now to say they've already arrived and they need help now. So you can have anything from 2 years prior to arrival to 2 days, if you're lucky.
Yeah. So there's a trend towards people researching it more before they enter the country.
Absolutely.
What do you think is driving that? But outside of COVID, so that's a whole separate thing, COVID. Obviously, people are prevented from moving. But
Yes.
That's a trend. Back in 2019, you're seeing that it was more than in 2015?
Yes. And yeah, definitely they are researching more. But people who are moving these days are a lot more potentially young and savvy, I'd like to say. So they're used to researching online. It's not sort of 20 years ago where we didn't really trust the information. And people are arriving a lot more informed than what they might have been 20 years ago.
I sometimes, just out of curiosity, watch on YouTube migrants who've moved to Australia and giving guides to their own people back home. There's some English guys. It's always interesting to hear their perspective.
Yes.
So I would imagine that kind of media is consumed. It's much more, as media gets more diverse and fragmented,
Yes.
there's more ability to connect with that. And so you could have some more confidence that you've got a ground truth about what life will be like, and it would be less left to the imagination, I guess.
Yes, there's two parts to that, and it's about using that the right way. You can go onto social media and you can ask a question about what suburb should I live in. And you can, no jokes, there'll be 100 replies because everybody loves the suburb that they live in. But it's not necessarily right for that family, because the person replying on social media doesn't know the budget, doesn't know, the daughter does tennis lessons or equestrian or something. So they get 100 responses, but it's not always helpful. I think you have to know what sort of questions to ask, and rather reaching out to somebody and, once you're in an area, using social media to then reach out and say, my kids are starting at the school on Mondays, anybody else, can we catch up? So it's about asking those questions, but we only know what we know.
Yeah, there's a bit of a selection bias if you ask people about where they live. So they've continued to live in that spot. I would imagine that if you surveyed people, say, by local government area, what do you think will happen to housing prices in your area? I would hazard a guess they would say everyone would say it's higher than the national average.
Yes.
They will value the things that they have chosen. So if you live on the northern beaches, you wouldn't dream of living in St Ives, where you'd have to drive further to the beach.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that is an interesting problem, and I see this plays out on online reviews for suburbs.
Right. Yes, it would. Yes.
And to be real estate agents also writing the reviews is a bit of a problem, and we're trying to get around that with some more objective information with Microburbs.
Yes, exactly. And then there's also the fact that the information that you might be receiving is, one, as I said, not relevant to your situation, but it might not be accurate or up to date. So a typical question I might be seeing is, how do I convert my driving license? And somebody will say, well, I've been here for 25 years and this is what I did. It's kind of, well, that's not helpful.
Yeah. So your target market in terms of age, is it like middle age or?
Probably middle age. I think it depends also on, again, things are subjective, but it depends on their lifestyle. So, for example, a South African might not look at leaving South Africa until they have children and then realize, oh, hang on, there's not much future, perhaps, or the universities are burning down and I need to move. So when you live in a country like South Africa, for example, we might look at that and say, oh, I couldn't put up with the crime every day or the load shedding or whatever it might be. But for South Africans, it's normal. But then there's something that might change their perspective. So I do a lot of young families. The British at the moment, I'm doing a lot of British, especially, I'm sorry to say British, but especially in the medical field, because the NHS is really struggling over there. And, you know, there again, their motivation to move is to do with their job or their career, and they're able to get visas. So definitely, I mean, not everybody can get a visa for Australia. There's certain countries that can't get, for example, working holiday visas. So my demographic is probably sort of 25 to 50, which is where the business visas and skills shortage visas are being offered.
Where the most contributions to Australia can be given.
Yes.
So Australia is really specialised in skilled migration, and I think that's a large part of the reason why I remember growing up as a child, there was a more of an inferiority complex in Australia compared to Asia, growing Asia, or the mother country, the UK, more cultured. I think it's London and the US. The US Americans not knowing us, you know them, sort of thing, and that's that combined with the internationalization, that's really changed over my lifetime, and businesses like yours are helping to bring that along.
Absolutely, absolutely, and it's bridging that gap and finding the similarities between the two cultures as well. You know, as you said, we might know Americans.
Yeah, that would be a big one. I would imagine in South Africa, there's a lot more home help.
Yes.
But yeah, so you've got that developing country versus developed country trade-off, I guess.
Yes.
So you can have more.
But then on the other hand, you might have the help in South Africa, but you can't necessarily comfortably walk down the street and go and get a coffee. So it's, you know, what people's priorities are. Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense. So where are we in the post-COVID era? What have you noticed as people are coming back into the country?
I'm definitely noticing everything is much more automated now. Everything is online. Even the rental process itself for obtaining a rental, there's very little love in it these days, which is quite sad. The whole process of renting a property now is online, and it's just about the number crunching. And I think that's really quite disappointing. I think I do hope that somewhere in the future we go back to estate agents that are helpful and are understanding and just take a bit more than just what's on paper for them. So I think there's going to be a lot more acceptance of migrants into Australia. I'm really hoping for that, especially for those that are still seeking jobs. Although a lot of the people that I work with already have work in Australia, there's usually a spouse that doesn't, and it can be quite difficult for them to find work. You know, there is a bit of, as we were saying earlier, a bias, you know, when somebody sees a CV, for example, and we can have the same with a rental application. Unfortunately, I still see a lot of that, but I think it's going to get better because COVID has taught Australians how reliant we are on migrants. And the amount of, you know, cafes and service providers that weren't able to provide a good service or full service that we were used to because there weren't students in the country, for example. So I think they're starting to, and I'm hoping that a lot of that negativity will dissipate around migrants, and people will be a little bit more understanding and bringing them in and welcoming them.
I've noticed over the Christmas break, so we're recording this in 13th of January 2023. I noticed over the Christmas break, visiting regional Australia, the service levels were still at COVID levels further out where there are fewer migrants. So I remember seeing signs, things like, please be nice to the staff that actually showed up today.
Yes. I think that's still in my local pharmacy.
So yeah, it feels a lot in Sydney, which is obviously, and I live fairly close to the CBD. Obviously, more migrants have come back, so there has been the ability to fill these roles.
Yes, and I'm interested to see where that whole, you know, where AI might replace some of those government services, you know, in visa processing, because that's been a big issue. Is, you know, post-COVID, I had people ready to get on planes, but they just weren't getting their visas. And that's impacted everything down the line. It's starting to get a bit better, but it's been a bit of a train smash, I must be honest. And I'd be interested to see how many of those government services across the board, but particularly in visas, because I think even across the globe, that's going to get, people are just moving more. Global mobility is going to become a bigger thing. People can choose where they want to work now.
Yes, I know lots of people that had a lot of trouble getting a passport, renewing their passport after COVID to go overseas.
Yes.
People in my own family included. And it did expose that it would obviously be quite a manual process. So it's relative to the number of staff that you can have. And the world is speeding up in general, I think.
It definitely is.
There may be, particularly if globalization doesn't completely unwind, or maybe it just becomes one civilization. So you've got the West still working together, friendshoring.
Yes.
So if it's that, then you might have the ability to move people much faster. And broadly speaking, AI will be speeding things up. So the generative models and things. The migration infrastructure needs to be able to accommodate that. I want to pick up on a point before about, so you mentioned about rental becoming more automated. Do you think that's partly due to the squeeze in the rental market? So it's become a seller's market from a buyer's market, seller's market from the point of view of rental inventory.
I don't necessarily think so, Luke. I think it's been one of where COVID taught us that we can work remotely, can work from home, and a lot of the estate agents were the same. So pre-COVID, you would never apply for a property before you've seen it. Now, estate agents, during COVID, estate agents started doing that because they were limiting the number of people who could walk through a house. So, for example, they would only allow 5 people to go into a home, and we couldn't inspect properties that were still tenanted. So estate agents started processing applications prior to us inspecting, and those that were shortlisted were allowed to come to the inspection.
Right.
So they opened up a whole new change in the rental market, where now they've sort of thought, that worked quite well, I'll carry on doing that. So, and that's happening a lot now, where a lot of estate agents are actually asking for applications prior to us even inspecting properties. And it's crazy because every estate agent is working so differently, and there's different platforms that they've all signed up to. Pre-COVID, they would all be on, probably 80% of them would be on OneForm, which is an application platform. But now there's sort of 5 or 6 different ones. So, as different companies are saying, there's a gap in the market, let me release a platform to apply for rentals, and we can add this and we can add that and we can add their utilities, and so all those things are being added on now, and each estate agent is working with a different platform, which makes my job hard because I'm trying to prepare people before they arrive, and then they've got to complete 5 different applications when we start inspecting. But I think COVID just showed estate agents that they can work a little bit more efficiently, and I'm noticing that a lot of the estate agents are much younger. So I think COVID, people who are sitting at home and sort of thought, okay, well, because real estate was considered one of the essential services, so they could continue working, albeit slower, they could continue working. So we had a lot of people who did their real estate license during COVID and made a career change. And I think they, being a younger generation, perhaps are more in tune with doing everything online as opposed to in person.
Yeah, very interesting. So that's a value add for your service. So
yes,
it's a pain for you, but obviously you get fast at it. Whereas the migrant would look at it and go, I thought I already applied for this thing. They don't understand. So the relationship between real estate agents and the market is different from country to country.
Yes.
And, that's a useful service.
Yes, people don't realize that. Yeah, people don't realize that. They think they're going to arrive here and it's the same as where they're from. In the UK, you can go to a rental home, you can have a look at it, take a half an hour if you want to, private inspection, think about it for a couple of days, maybe chat to the landlord, get a few things done, and then put in your offer and deal with all the paperwork. As opposed to Australia, where you get 15 minutes, take it or leave it. So it's a very different market, and people do come here thinking it's going to be the same. And people apply on the wrong platforms as well, and then wonder why their application's never processed. So, they might have prepared something on realestate.com.au, but the agent's using to apply, and they just keep hitting the button on realestate.com.au, but the agent isn't even receiving the automated emails.
And so not having a local address, does that count against them in the process as well? Would the real estate agents see it as a safer bet to get someone with a Australian address, or does that not show up as an issue?
It depends. The estate agents will shortlist down to 3 to 5 applications that they'll then present to the landlord, and the landlord will decide who they choose to tenant the property. And the address doesn't necessarily make a difference. I think what makes a difference is the length of the lease, how quickly a migrant can move into the property, or anybody, a tenant, could move into the property. That makes a big difference. And often migrants are able to move in quicker than a local person because they might already be here in a hotel or something like that. So that has a big impact on the application, rental price. And when we're moving migrants, they're skilled workers, and our skills shortage list means that migrant probably has a very stable job. So, if I'm working with an ER doctor, for example, they've got a stable job compared to somebody else who might be applying for the same home.
Yeah, and a clean rental history as well, I guess.
Very clean.
They've never fallen short on an Australian lease before.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we do ask them to bring written references and things that just help appease the estate agent. Otherwise, they won't even get shortlisted. But yes, that's where my job becomes important.
The bird in the background there, that's called a kookaburra. You'll be hearing more of those. If I'm not sure if that came through or not.
I didn't hear it.
One of these things that in podcast number 2, if it didn't come through for you, then it probably didn't for the audience as well. So that's fine. Yeah, very interesting. So you've got your the English professionals, some South Africans, and any other groups, any other?
Oh yeah, I move people from all sorts of countries. A lot of returning Aussies at the moment, which is quite interesting because they've perhaps left it as a 20-year-old and gone backpacking around Europe and now have a family and coming back to Australia, and they don't actually know how the school system works or which suburb to choose, or they don't want to live where they grew up, kind of thing. A lot of New Zealanders, we've got a lot of Kiwis coming across, a few from Canada, which is always interesting because Canada has very similar migration issues that we do, so that's always interesting. French, German, I've got Czech Republic at the moment, so yeah, a wide range of nationalities and interests.
So is it easier for a New Zealander? So obviously New Zealand, you go there, you see the same banks, there's a lot of the same, the real estate industry I understand is different there to a degree, yes. But is there less work that needs to be done for a New Zealander?
Yes and no. There's less familiarization, and most of them have at least been to Australia. A lot of the people that are moving here sight unseen, basically. So there's definitely a lot in that. But again, as we were saying earlier, it's more the mental process as well, and helping them prepare. And just about every nationality that I move here, they're quite surprised at our rental market. And disappointed and scared. You'll see a lot on social media. They're scared of it. So yeah, that's quite sad, I think.
Yeah. So how often do people end up having to make tough compromises? So they thought that they were going to have a beautiful 4-bedroom house with a big yard, but then they look at the travel times to the city. That must be how bad are the trade-offs from people's points of view?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big part of managing expectations in my job, and I do that early on, and just everything's going to be a compromise. They can say, I can find a rental for somebody at whatever rental price you've got, but you're going to have to make compromises, as you said, move further away from the city or give up this, have a longer commute, whatever it might be. So it's working through those compromises with them. And reading, you've got a blog on your website about choosing the suburb that's right for your child, and what how that can influence the upbringing of the child. Those things are important, and it's hard when you're moving country to try and take all that in. And knowing what I do and how I work with people, I don't know how people try and do it on their own, because the long-term effects can be quite devastating.
Yeah, so for the benefit of the audience, Robyn's referring to an article that we wrote that was covering research done in the US that found that by far the best thing you can do for your child is move to a nice area. So the kinds of people that are around, all these other interventions that you can do as a parent, there isn't that strong, for a large number of them, there isn't that strong or nearly as strong impact as simply the selection of the suburb, moving to a nicer area, so to speak.
Yes, absolutely. And it's balancing all those things, and that's why we do a needs analysis, to be able to go through and understand what the whole family is looking for. And people underestimate the size of Australia. Definitely underestimate the size of Australia. So that's always interesting, especially when you've got a dual income and one person is, they might each have jobs, but they haven't considered the size and the distance between where they'll each be working. And by the time they come to me, I'm kind of like, what did you do?
The size of the metropolitan areas.
Yes.
Yeah. So yes, Australia is big. I haven't been much to the outback myself, but just getting around the city. So friends from Canberra, they'll tell me horror stories of how they drove from one side of Sydney to the other. They were meeting a friend in the north in the morning, and then they had an appointment to meet someone in the far south in the afternoon. And I'm like, no Sydney-sider would do that.
No. No, absolutely not.
Yeah, one thing that strikes me is that often in other countries, what we call one city, other places would call many cities. So it can be quicker to go between cities, in separate cities in Europe, than it is to get from one side of Sydney or Melbourne to the other.
Absolutely.
So that's an education.
Yeah, you can. When I lived in France, we could get across to Belgium and have waffles and be back for school pickup.
That's pretty out there.
It was cool.
I wonder on that. So I guess we'll come more to like the feedback, because it was also very interesting how people feel about Australia.
Yes.
One thing that I hear Europeans say is, there's no other countries to visit. You can't go anywhere. It's such a long way. So like weekends, and I always think, well, what are you after? Like, you could actually experience much more different cultures simply by going to an ethnic suburb.
Yes.
But, I think there may be a bit of snobbery around that. It's like going to the southwest of Sydney, like it's not as high socioeconomic as to say I went to the Mediterranean or something.
Yes.
Whereas it's much easier to do, and in many ways actually a bigger cultural difference. So you're actually experiencing people from Asia, from the Middle East, often, and if you pick the right suburb, new arrivals from those countries.
Yes.
So yeah, I wonder if you had any thoughts on that.
A couple of thoughts. One is that it's probably status driven, that they can say, I've gone to, like I just did now, perhaps. I'm going to go to Belgium for waffles. But I think it's status driven, and people sort of, I'm going on an international flight, even though in Europe it might just be a 5-hour, 1-hour flight type of thing. But I think for most people arriving here, they're actually really surprised at how culturally diverse Australia is. I had a lady in my car the other day from Pakistan, and she just said to me, she said, I know you told me it's a melting pot of nationality. She said, but I just actually can't believe it. And she said, we were stopped at some traffic lights in Melbourne City, and she said, just look there's that she was just naming off all the different nationalities. So I think people can, and you can go into suburbs, as you say. Yesterday I was in, where was I? Probably Kensington area, Cinder maybe, but one street corner was all Vietnamese and Asian restaurants. You went 100 meters down the road, you had all the Indian, Sri Lankan, so you can get all the cultures if you want it. You can eat anything. There was even a restaurant from Ghana. There was, you can get everything you want if you want it.
I've had traveling experiences where I'll spend a good amount of time in some monoculture country. Very interesting, but I'll get a little bit homesick. And then the experience of going to the airport and just seeing a million cultures, it feels a little bit like a homecoming. So it's like, oh, good. There's all kinds of food. There's all kinds of people around.
Yes.
And then there's that second level where you actually get the Qantas flight, and then it gets more Anglo again. It's like, oh, wow, that's what Australians, we sound like that. I hadn't heard that.
Do you know what it is?
Well, people seem so relaxed.
Yeah, it's the air hostess. As soon as you get on the flight and you get that "good day, mates" or "good day," you know, and then you're like, "Okay, I'm home."
Yeah, and it's like ushering in, from my point of view, ushering into just like an easy life. But obviously, yeah. So it seems it's easy for me. Obviously, like there's just no hassle getting through daily life. But of course, it's the opposite for others coming in, which is where you come in. It's not a comfort zone. And as you said before, people underestimate how difficult the transition would be.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's, there's that preconceived idea that the whole of Australia is like Bondi Beach, and it's not. Trust me, Melbourne is not, especially Melbourne is not. And there's an idea that you're coming to a country that's laid back and easy. We've, everybody stereotypes the Australians as being laid back and easy, and yes, we are. But that means that migrants often don't prepare, and they think it's going to be easy, and then they get here and realize that, oh, actually it's not. I am different. I am a little bit different, and I need to find that even playing field between my culture and the Australian culture. But yeah, there's a real preconceived idea out there that everything is easy in Australia. And I think if you come to a country where you don't speak the language, I think that makes a big difference, because then you are actually aware. And I had it myself when I lived in France. I made a lot of friends in France that I'm still in contact with now, because you're going through something that's difficult together. So there were other English, American, Spanish, other cultures that we were all friends, because we'd all moved together and gone through the stress together. Whereas in England, I can't say I'm really in contact with too many people that I was friends with in England, because it was just comfortable. And I think in Australia also, I've seen a lot of people accuse us of being cliquey. And sure, there's some cities and some suburbs that can be a bit cliquey, but I think migrants themselves really need to put their hand out and be a little bit more almost forceful in saying, hey, can I come along? Or hey, can I join you here? Or hey, come over. Because the Australians, we're all set in our little circles already. And, we've become complacent with migrants because there are so many different nationalities here that we're kind of like, hey, how you doing? Hey, good luck. See you soon. And we leave it there. Where I think
so Australians are very extroverted. So one thing I find is that when I'm traveling abroad, I'll meet some other Aussies, and it's always good to meet other Aussies, same culture,
noticeable
references. You're laughing away, having drinks, and then some other nationality will come to you and say, "How long have you guys known each other? Did you guys go to school together?" Like, it was like, "I just met this dude."
Yeah.
I don't know him. Like, I know him about as much as you. You've been sitting there our entire conversation.
Absolutely.
So on the one hand, we seem very easy, but then from the point of view of, say, Eastern European or a German, they might think, oh, the body language signals suggest this person is very close and gets close friendships very quickly. But actually, we're just not giving off the same body language signals for who a close friend is that they would. So I remember when I lived in Hungary, it was a lot easier you could just instinctively know. So if you were sitting at a pub, you could just instinctively tell who was close to one another just by their language, not their language, but their body language. You could feel there was a certain distance if people weren't part of the group. And I don't think that distance is nearly as strong here. And that must be, so I understand a lot of foreigners, they'll be invited to a party and they think that they're completely in. And it's simply not the case. It's not that they made any faux pas or anything. It's just that people don't think about inviting all of their acquaintances everywhere. Yeah?
Exactly. And the migrant might walk away thinking, okay, well, maybe these Australians are a bit superficial because it's only when I'm around that they're friendly, but then they don't reach out afterwards, kind of thing. So yeah, it's managing all those expectations again, and telling people this is how you should go about it and how you should immerse yourself. Because there's also the other issue is that I get a lot of people saying to me, I don't want to be with other British, or I do want to be with other British because it's going to be easier to network. And there again, there's pros and cons to both of those things. And you get migrant silos where people start they don't properly integrate, and they take all their advice from within that migrant silo, and that could be job advice, and that can be quite detrimental. If you've come in from India and you moved into a house share with 5 other Indians, and there's an accountant and whatever else, and you're an engineer, and you're asking the accountant for job advice, it's not going to get you very far. So you've got to, again, it's a bit like I was saying earlier, asking questions on social media. You need to know who to ask and really integrate and network with people outside of your
it's an interesting thought. Next time you engage with a profession and you see someone who seems stereotypical for the profession, like a Middle Easterner hairdresser, or an Indian working at a service station, and you might think, I wonder if that person is that really them? Is it really that their culture is oriented towards that, or it's just that they haven't been exposed to other ideas on what someone like them could be doing?
Yes. And that's a big part of what I want to be working on this year is really that helping people to network properly and know what questions to ask when, and especially in a professional capacity is making it easier to make those connections and network with people within your profession rather than only in your migration silo.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So you've got people from all different parts of the world coming in. I wonder is there a difference between people from the New World versus the Old World? So are there commonalities between, say, Canadians, South Africans, and New Zealanders that you don't have with the Old World? And is that related to how quickly and so-called superficially people make relationships?
I think if I had to try and think of anything that I've noticed, it would probably be that those from the New World are better prepared, and those from the Old World tend to be more set in their ways and stagnant about what this is how I am, and Australia needs to adapt to me. So I think that's probably one of the differences that I definitely see. And I think New World migrants are those sort of up and coming quick. They've done a lot of research. They're ready for change. I think that's the important thing. I think I've noticed they're definitely more ready for change and accepting of change.
All their ancestors made that change as well. So
yes.
There's something in the family culture or the genes or something.
Yes.
So that's and that's an interesting idea of like there's people are multi-generational into the New World, so they've gone between cultures many times, and then there are those that have all of their history going back a fair while anyway. Obviously, there was international migration before the modern era, but having all their history bound to a particular place. Would there also be a difference between, say, people from large capital cities like London versus, say, the north of England? Might it be harder for a more international city? So obviously London is very multicultural as well.
I wouldn't say I've noticed that in particular. I would see a difference between the culture of the British culture as opposed to the French culture, for example. But within cities, not necessarily. I think it's a little bit like you were saying in that blog that you wrote about suburbs. It's about how you're brought up and whether you can bounce a little bit harder than somebody else could. So, and I could even take that as far as the schooling that they might have been brought up in. Somebody who's perhaps come from a private school or come from that, they can be more well-rounded in some areas, but they maybe don't have, and with all due respect, a lot of the resilience that some of the others might have. And I think that if I had a look at somebody from London and Birmingham or Manchester or something, they might have a lot more resilience and perhaps even some more patience. I find people from the bigger cities, Parisians, the Londoners, they have less patience. They're used to working at a much faster level than what the Australians are used to. So there's a much higher demand from them.
Yeah, I was thinking your point before about the expectation that Australians are laid back and easy. It's like, well, what side of the transaction are you on? Yeah. So if you're dealing with someone who's laid back and easy, it might be laid back and easy for them, but not for you. If you're really from like a tier 1 city, like London or New York.
Yes, absolutely. And the amount of people that say to me, I'm not very difficult. I don't think and you sort of think, you might not be difficult in the country you are in, but what you're asking for is going to be difficult in the Australian sense.
Yeah, my wife is Hungarian, and I meet lots of Hungarians who moved over here. And you learn that there are some things that they will pick up on that you wouldn't have ever thought of. So, for example, should you bathe in the morning or the evening? So for a Hungarian, the idea of going to bed in your own filth is disgusting. Yeah.
Right.
So the idea that you're developing this filthy bed with all of your days, okay, that's fair enough. Whereas from an Australian point of view, it's like, why would you go out to work unbathed?
Yes, absolutely.
Like, you do either. It's like
they're both right, but
in fact, probably I think both Australians and Hungarians have, like all modern people, bathe too often. It's actually not necessary to do either every day.
Yes.
From a point of view of hygiene, it's more about the modern aversion to human body odor.
Yes, to the smell. And that comes into certain words that people use as well. I was with a South African family this week, and South Africans say the word shame a lot. Oh, shame. But they mean it as a sort of sympathetic, I'm sympathizing with you, I feel sorry for you. Whereas Australians see the word shame as you're bringing shame on the family, you're embarrassing yourself. So even little words like that. There was another lady who was saying to me the other day, she went to the doctor and she said, my pain is hectic, which is a very South African thing to say. But the doctor would have been very confused at, why is it hectic? Like, that just sounds so weird.
Yeah, does that mean that you're getting a lot of different pain at once? It was sharp for a moment, then it became dull and aching, and then a bolt of lightning came down the whole arm.
Absolutely. Where all she meant was it's pretty full on.
Sure.
It's a high pain level.
Yeah, hectic is more of like a young person's thing here. I think the party was hectic. I had a hectic time. But you wouldn't. A middle-aged person wouldn't go to the doctor and say, I'm having really hectic cancer.
Yes, and that's exactly what the topic was, because she said to me, I don't feel like the doctor's really responding to me very well. And when she explained what she had said, I said, well, that's why he's confused by the wording that you're using. So even those little things can make a big difference in a migrant's life. They're just something that's very normal for them to say, but it can just cause that bit of friction sometimes.
So, you made a point before about being isolated in your own community, and there may be opportunities outside that community. So one thing that I've seen in the data is that different ethnic groups have a much more, there's a huge difference in how much they're spread across the country. So Canadians, for example, are just everywhere. There's a thin layer of Canadians spread over the whole country.
Right.
And English, it's a thicker layer, but they're in a lot of places. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have, when I was looking at it a few years ago, Bangladeshis were like, you could fit, I can't remember the exact stat, but it was something like you could fit all the country's tens of thousands of Bangladeshis on a couple of football fields.
Wow. And that also just comes back to the question you were asking me just now about the new world and the old world. So the Canadians have taken to that change, and that's what I was saying, is that the new world people are happy to take to that change. So they've actually made up their own mind about where they want to live, whereas the British, as you said, are quite clustered together, which explains that they've relied on each other to look after each other.
Yeah, I've always found Canadians to be very culturally similar.
Yes, very.
And it's always Canada's are always a good thing to bring up if someone attributes Australian culture to weather. I say, we're just laid back because it's hot here. Yeah.
Yeah.
What about Alberta? Northern Alberta or somewhere.
Yeah. Absolutely. No, it's a very interesting field. And I think, there's different draw cards for Australia for migrants. And again, it comes down to those lifestyle choices and what the person's moving here for. And it could be schooling. So I was listening to a blog that you'd said where NAPLAN wasn't actually a big draw card for where people lived. And that wasn't to do with migrants. But the amount of migrants that contact me and say, I've already shortlisted schools and they've done it on the rankings or they've done it on NAPLAN. And I'll go back to them and I'll say, yes, but that's a very that's, maybe an international school and 60% of the population is Chinese, which isn't going to really translate well for your child making friends and things. So you've got to have that human element in understanding it. But it is interesting how people do try and at least research, but you've got to take it with a pinch of salt, I think.
Yeah. So coming to Australia is, to a degree, is like having to learn about the whole world. Yeah. So there's a world of cultures here. And interesting. Like, I hear Hungarians say that they're worried that if they start their kids at school here, that they'll be bullied for being different.
Really?
And typically the kind of schools that they're going to end up at. So other migrants, they're not going to be at all interesting, let alone a subject of bullying. In generally, obviously, there are cases where it happens.
Yes, of course. Yeah, and the schooling is always an interesting one, and it does affect where people can live, especially for migrants. But there's a lot more that has to be taken into account other than just the schooling.
I think that article you're referring to, so that was a few years ago now, and I think it was about the specifically prices, so that NAPLAN wasn't driving up prices in the way that you might expect. It's been a while, and we'll definitely have to redo that.
Yes, it was. Yeah, it was to do with that. It was to do with NAPLAN not driving up rental or prices of house purchases. And I was listening to it also because, as I say to migrants all the time, the closer to the city you live, the more it costs. And I think in that podcast, you were talking a lot about that sort of, I do see it here a little bit in the rental market that people will move to a high-performing state school. Because they want to be within that zone. Whether it's the right choice for the child is a whole nother argument. But what I'm always trying to get through to migrants is they're looking on realestate.com.au and they see something costs $500 a week, but they're not taking into consideration what's outside of the house. And we were talking in that podcast about how the train station would affect the price and how, the everything around the house that makes the house easier and a better lifestyle is built into the rental price. And you were talking about sales prices there, but it's built into the rental price also. And it's hard
also, lifestyle factors, in particular with rental. In the value of land, mostly you're paying for land, and unless you've built an amazing house, and the value of land is very much about proximity. You can get yourself a large amount of land. You could plonk yourself in the Nullarbor Plain, and no one would even challenge you, right? You could. No one will find you.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
One interesting thing that I found is, if going to Google Images, if you search for Australian in German or Australie, and you'll see pictures of the most valuable real estate. So you'll see Sydney Harbour. Yeah.
Right.
Whereas if you search it in Arabic or Chinese, I won't even pretend to I don't even know the words for that, but just doing a Google Translate. Beg your pardon. Sorry, it's the other way around. So you search for Australian or Australie, and you'll get the outback, the wide open spaces. Yeah? Whereas in Chinese or Arabic, you'll actually get the city itself.
Really?
That tells you something about, and that is also reflected in where the different cultures settle. So your developing countries, they typically go for convenience, whereas particularly Western Europeans, they go for space.
Right.
You would have found the same, space and privacy?
Definitely, because and sometimes because they've come from such a busy environment that they want the space. But I almost think that that's going to be short term, because then they realize the convenience isn't there.
Yeah. So there are lots of isolated lonely people in Australia. You
All
can.
Germans?
What's that?
All Germans?
On maybe all kinds. So what kind of, how do you learn? So you do the engagement with them, you get them settled in the place. How do you learn subsequently how their life goes from there? Do you have follow-ups, engagement?
Yeah, we do follow up with them. I think there also it's become a little bit hard and fast for us because people aren't, and I find it quite sad, but they're not seeing the value in engaging in cultural training and the things that should come after finding the house. So many people these days, unfortunately, just engage us to do the house search because at that time they don't see the value in all the mental preparedness that they should be doing. But yes, we do keep in contact. We try and have coffee mornings. And again, because networking is very important, I want people to integrate properly. And I would say 95% of the people that I'm working with are looking at Australia for a long-term basis. They're not looking to come here just for a 2-year contract. Although they might only have a 2-year visa to start with, everybody kind of starts somewhere. So for me, it's very important that people do integrate, and I do try and have networking events. A lot of them I'm connected with on Facebook, so we keep in contact that way. And, but even this morning, I had a text message from somebody I probably moved 7 or 8 months ago. And he was like, can you just tell me where to get this? Or can you, so I really value that long-term relationship with my clients, that they can just come back and say, where do I find this? I had somebody the other day who texted me and said, we drove around the whole day today trying to find a hamster for the kids. We promised them a hamster. And I'm like, it's a rodent in Australia. You're not going to find it in a pet shop here. So yeah, we do keep in contact with it, but some people just want the house and run, and we respect that as well. We do send birthday cards and bits and pieces to try and keep in contact with everybody. But yeah,
I wonder, would that vary based on profession? So if you're doing something like marketing, PR, then you're probably going to you're going to come up against Australian culture all the time, and you may be also, having chosen marketing or PR, you might be the kind of person that would be IT or accounting. Then you might
to a certain degree. I think mindset is actually more the thing that affects that than their career choice. I'm just trying to sort of think, like I move a lot of engineers, and they probably are, but then maybe they're more introverted. So maybe that's why. But yeah, I think your mindset of whether you're coming here to make it a life and you want to integrate, whereas other people come here and say, okay, I just want to be with South Africans, just leave me alone now, I've got my little South African connections. I think mindset is actually what keeps people engaged, and whether they want to actually integrate or not. You can't force and change that, unfortunately. Otherwise I would have everybody very happy-go-lucky and integrated.
Yeah, we have integration kinds of data coming up on Microburbs. I'm still getting my head around it all.
Yes.
But there is survey data about how well you, whether you feel you can rely on other people. It would be very interesting to track that trajectory. So how engaged are people in with the community? Do they feel that they can? So particularly, I would imagine if they're part of a small outpost of a migrant group, then in a way, well, they're paying big city dollars to live in a really expensive place, but they're living in a village, which might massively limit their services. They only go to the local accountant that speaks the language.
Yes.
On the other hand, I guess that village life is a big thing that town planners try and push within cities. So having that sense of community is quite powerful.
It would be interesting to see how the data comes out on integration, because there was some research I was doing the other day on individualism and how people are becoming more individual and just socializing online. And how is that going to, is integration going to just become an online statistic, which sounds quite scary.
And how deep is it genuinely if you're not meeting people in person?
Absolutely.
Are people able to make that leap over to, and if they're just doing it online, then why bother moving to a big city at all? Yeah. So have you seen a trend towards tree change, sea change? So people are like, oh, I was in the countryside in England. Now I want to live in Bowral or somewhere.
Yeah, I'm definitely seeing a lot of people, even migrants coming in, that are saying Victoria had a strong lockdown. I don't want to live there. Like, we got a bad rap for that, and they're going to Brisbane. And you sort of say, well, okay, but you're coming from London. Do you know how humid Brisbane is? No, it doesn't matter. So, yeah, even although we had quite a lot of migration within Australia going to sort of places like Brisbane and even, up from Melbourne out to Sydney, and I know people sort of migrated from Sydney up to Brisbane. I'm seeing that on an international basis as well, that people are definitely heading more for that. They've taken that whole political aspect into and really for the first time being aware of how much power the state governments have in Australia. And that's obviously really played out a lot. I've been quite surprised at how many people have spoken to me about that in the last few months, that they were so aware, not just of the lockdown, but one person was saying, it's a bit like, Trump had, where he didn't always have control over each state of America, and they've, we were compared on that scale.
Yeah, when I traveled a lot last year, and I like talking to random people, and I found all different kinds of cultures. They were aware of our draconian, what they saw as our draconian lockdown laws, and they could often name the state of Victoria.
Yes.
But I think regularly, to most people, they've got around the world, they've got their own, particularly if they're from the English-speaking world, they've got their own places called Victoria. And now that was actually an entity in their brain. It'd be interesting to see what kinds of, does the Victorian migration look different from here on in? Is there a certain kind of freedom-loving person that won't go to Victoria but will go to Brisbane? I mean, it's interesting. They probably wouldn't know that the reason that, say, for example, New South Wales took a more liberal approach with lockdowns, but it never even took off in the other states. So it's not necessarily that Queensland would have been less strict on lockdowns. We don't know. So there's extra stuff to learn about that.
I think you'll find your numbers have increased to Brisbane, but I think they'll come back when Brisbane has its first summer. They'll come running back down to Melbourne and pull down again.
Yeah, so I wonder, have some of your customers never experienced humidity, or perhaps only on holiday?
No, definitely. Some of them have never really experienced it. Or, as you say, if you've been a Londoner and you've gone to, where do they go? Ibiza and those places, that they might have experienced a bit of heat. And that's an important thing, is that when you go on holiday to a place, it's very different than living there. Trust me, because people say, but how could you leave Paris? It's so beautiful. And I'm like, yeah, beautiful for a holiday, but you don't want to live there, kind of thing. So it's very different living there. So people sort of think, oh no, I'm going to love the heat. And then after a couple of years, they're like, no, I had enough of it. And I think there's also the other element is that spiders and things that can kill you in Australia is very well publicized. So I get a lot of people who are concerned about, each state and what can kill you in that state.
And what do you tell them?
Well, I do tell them that, well, I mean, the colder climates have different, down in Melbourne, we have a colder climate than in Brisbane. And I know my personal experience in Brisbane, the spiders I've seen there were a lot bigger than I've seen in Melbourne. So
nobody dies of spiders anymore, pretty much, right?
No, I don't know.
There's anti-venom now. So
it doesn't matter. People are still scared. I had a lady once who wouldn't go into a house because on the porch was somebody had planted grapevines. So these grapevines were kind of hanging over the porch. She wouldn't go under it. She was like, there's going to be spiders in there. I'm not going anywhere near it. No, they're scared, really.
Yeah, absolutely everywhere. Anything you can't see. It's like sharks in the ocean.
Yes, and that's what you're going to say to people. Yes, there are snakes, but they're not vicious ones that are chasing after you. They're going to bite you if you hurt them or you stand on them or something, but they're not chasing you down the footpath.
Yeah, my understanding with snakes is that it's typically a kid is in a tricycle on long grass, and they just go right over one. The snake misunderstands the situation and thinks that he's under attack.
Yes.
But yeah, my understanding is snakes and spiders with the anti-venom, you can tell your customers this. Maybe this will help business. It's just it's a complete non-issue. Do you know the most dangerous animal in Australia?
No.
The horse.
Yes, there's most people. Yes, more injuries by horse.
Horses. Look out for horses.
Yes,
Yeah?
yes, yes. This is true. This is true.
Not camels, not kangaroos.
There's
I'm not
also
talking about some Australian horse. If there's like some drop horse or something that's particularly vicious that attacks only tourists and has massive teeth. I'm just talking about regular European horses that you might see at the equestrian or at Centennial Park if you're in Sydney.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yes, I think there again, a lot of my work is managing expectations.
Yeah. So my experience going abroad last year was that all the publicity that they heard about Australia was bad, and yet they still wanted to come. So everyone wanted to know. I would say for every second person I spoke to, either they were interested in migrating to Australia, or they were interested for their nephew or their friend.
Yes.
Whereas in the past, it was always, I just want to visit Australia one day, and they'll never will. Right? It's like Australians with South America. Oh, it's so great to see the Aztec pyramids or whatever, but it's just too far away. It's too out there. There's no direct flights. So you've got this tremendous interest in migrating to Australia, and yet everything they've heard is negative. So they know about the bushfires, they know about the lockdowns, the bugs, and yet they, in my experience, the reason they're interested is two things. You would know much better than me. This is just from my 100 conversations or whatever, right? But they would name the wages, so the wage laws, and B, they have a friend or a cousin who's already done it.
Yes. Australia is quite lucky in that it has that image of being, clear skies, little pollution, happy people, so there's all that bubble of illusion that's out there. And because the world's becoming a smaller place and people are, as you said, not necessarily just saying, I want to go on holiday there. They want to actually make a full commitment because it's easier now to do that, to move to another country. So now it is a case of, I can live where I want to. And so they think until they try and get a visa. But it is that case of they can live in another country as opposed to just going there on holiday. But there's always going to be those drivers of what makes them jump over the edge and actually take the step in doing it, and whether that's a work or an opportunity or an education or whatever it might be.
So that's interesting from your point of view. So you get contacted by people who haven't really committed yet. And you actually get to see what kind of person actually does it, who actually hops on the plane.
Yes, and I have a huge respect for those people. My circumstances, I moved because my husband's work. It was different. But for those people that actually make the commitment and make that decision to leave their home country and move to another country, that's a big decision to make. It's a really, really hard decision. And there's so many family and personal issues that need to be taken into consideration, aging parents and all sorts of things, because you are going to be dislocating the family basically, and how that's going to be for you.
How often do they dip their toes in the water? So perhaps the primary breadwinner goes over to scope it out rather than hauling the whole family over and actually getting a lease?
Not very often, I'll be honest. So probably that might be easier in other countries, but because Australia is so far away, and you're probably looking at a 3 to 6 month commitment to do that, to just go and try it out. So I don't get that too often. I have seen a little bit more of that post-COVID because I don't even think COVID had something to do with that, but I've seen it in the last year where people, especially trades, so your plumbers, welders, those sort of people are coming here on 3-month visas. Now, there's a 3-month visa called the 400 visa that's normally used for an intercompany transfer. And what would happen there is you're already working for the business. They want to move you to Australia, but they need you now. And the 400 visa can be approved within probably 10 days.
It's so they fine if they want you straight away. Like there's a definite need.
A project that they're working on or whatever it might be. So it's very common in intercompany transfers. But what I'm seeing a huge amount of, and it's quite concerning, is you've got unscrupulous recruiters come immigration people who are going to vulnerable countries and finding trade people, offering them this 3-month visa to get out here with the promise that a longer visa will be lodged when they arrive in country. So I'm seeing a lot of that, and I'm seeing those people who are so desperate to leave that country that they're bringing their whole family and sending a container of goods with a 3-month visa in their hand, which is a huge risk. Now, like I said, I have a lot of respect for people who do that, but that's very risky to come here without a long-term visa. And within that, I have seen people who do a probably more logical step where the tradie will come here and get everything set up, and only once his long-term visa has been lodged will he bring the family. But it's quite unusual.
Yeah, so that's interesting. You've got unscrupulous, do they call themselves migration agents or recruiters, did you say?
Yeah, I would probably be very cautious of any migration agent that's actually got a recruitment section, because that's what I'm finding is happening. But also to get a visa it's so hard when you're moving internationally. There's so many people willing to take advantage. It's quite scary. But you have to have what's called a MARA agent. So your migration agent has to be a registered Australian migration agent. And there's a MARA register, MARA. People can go and Google that. And you have to find a MARA agent. Now, what's happening in these countries is they've got one MARA agent. But if you look at their portfolios, they're turning over 300 or 400 visas in a month. There's no way that one MARA agent is processing 300 or 400 visas. And when I've spoken to some of them, they're actually saying to me, no, the person that we actually dealt with, we found out is living in another country. So the person actually processing their visa has been a virtual support person, but the company is working off one MARA's certification, saying we're MARA agents, we've got a recruitment, we've got this one-stop shop, and people are falling for it, and they're not getting the right advice. Your immigration agent should be able to tell you what restrictions on schooling you've got or what restrictions there are on your visa. So on a 400 visa, for example, the spouse cannot work. The children cannot attend school. They are considered international students in all states. Now, you might not be aware of it, but some states here, so Victoria, for example, on a 2 or 4 year business visa or skilled sponsored visa, you get free state schooling. New South Wales isn't like that. If you're on a visa of any type, you pay international school fees. So that's another consideration people need to take when they're choosing where to live, is because that can be quite an impact on your pocket. But yeah, there's the immigration agents. You have to just work directly with a MARA agent. There's too many bad fish out there, if I can put it that way. You've got to be very careful and not be taken advantage of.
Yeah, right. Is this well known? Like, are there Four Corners episodes on this sort of thing?
I wish there were. But it's one of those things that might not be that interesting to Australians, so you don't get the news coverage on it.
There is certainly news coverage around targeting people for visas. On the education side of things.
Yes.
So I've definitely seen Four Corners or similar kinds of programs. They don't ever get the English tuition, or it might not be the right course for them and their abilities, and so there's the quandary for the university is whether to fail them or just keep taking the money. So it's interesting that's happening also on the work visa side of things.
Yeah, definitely.
And these people are here is it that they end up it's just that they've spent too much on a migration agent. Their expectations are wrong. They're only going to be held for a short period, and then they have to go back, and they might have disrupted their life in a large way.
Absolutely. And I think it's also the responsibility is also on the corporate who's offering the job, because they know exactly what they're doing. And the thing is that they're paying less for this visa than what they would pay a recruiter in Australia to get the job, to get somebody in that job.
Yeah,
So
right.
there's a sense of responsibility from the corporate as well.
Yeah. So how many people, what is Australia's retention rate, to use a marketing term?
For migrants,
how much can we keep, for migrants? How good are we at retaining migrants?
I think pretty good, but I'm not sure it's to do with the way that we're welcoming migrants. I think it's more to do with what the migrants leaving, perhaps. The migrant, what's driven the migrant to come here is the lack of pollution, the education system, the universities. It's those things that are keeping the migrant here. If I'm not mistaken, the average student stays for at least 8 years, has an 8-year visa before they go on to PR. And I know the percentage for them becoming citizens is very high. So it's more to do with the drivers. I think there's a real lack of support offered to migrants. You have almost two camps in my eyes. You have the corporate relocations who have a global mobility person, and the corporate pays for somebody to look after that person or that family unit and bring them to Australia safely and help them make the right start, as I say. And then you've got the refugee camp, which get all the information on how to register at Centrelink, how to do all these things. But there's that big skills shortage, the skills shortage visa people that are coming that are state sponsored. There's nobody at the airport saying, hey, welcome, here's how you do Centrelink, and here's how you do your Medicare, here's a bank account. There's none of that. And I think we've got a lot to learn for that, because in Canada, for example, like the equivalent of my book in Canada is written by a gentleman by the name of Nick Narani, and he wrote Arrive and Thrive in Canada. That is given to every single person who migrates to Canada on their arrival. And at least that tells people how to do things. There is a huge shortage of support for those skilled migrants that are arriving here without corporate support, who aren't refugees, and they literally, here's a visa, good luck with everything else.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So there's a huge amount of benefit to the Australian community that people can engage and can give back and find a relevant profession for themselves and get fully set up, as well as for themselves. And I guess part of the problem is that these people can't vote.
Exactly. But they pay taxes. They pay taxes, but they can't vote. Yes.
So it's not an election issue. You would think that would be a very important community to target. So brands are well aware that, Commonwealth Bank wants your first account to be with them, and that because they know that you probably won't switch after that.
Correct.
So maybe Australia needs to think about that as a country.
Yes.
Canada's a bit different in that they actually have a national font. Yeah.
Yes.
So they actually are more of a brand, a consistent. Maybe we've had a few fonts. We've got that COVID death ball as our brand at the moment. Golden death. I don't think they call it golden death.
There's too many variables in the Australian one. It's
it's too complex.
Yes. And it's a bit, I always say to people, Australians in the workforce, when I'm talking about work etiquette and how the workforce is and trying to match those cultures, is saying, Australians have an idea of how they want to get to a certain goal or project date, but they don't really have a process. It's kind of like, a bit of this, bit of that. Yeah, there we are, done. Whereas other people are like, no, we've got to do this first, we'll do that. Especially the Germans, as we were saying earlier, there must be a proper process in place. And the French always want to know the history of why that process is in place. So it's there's a lot of work to do, but I think there's quite a gap in welcoming skilled migrants. And I'm hoping that
improvisation in Australia.
Yes.
For example, our meetings don't have a set format. Particularly, they did a bit. I remember in my younger days, being a young geek attending meetings of suits, they would do their intros and it was more structured. But today it feels very unstructured, the way that we do meetings.
Yes.
And that can be off-putting for more structured cultures.
Absolutely.
It's like there's no set rules. It's more anything goes.
Yeah.
Some people hold their knife and fork in different ways here. Some people scoop
up,
some people go down. I remember having the same experience spending time in California. So I would ask, I had a mental model that other countries have set ways of doing things. And my Aussie friends would say, actually, no, it's pretty much up to you. So that was another sort of new world place to come
You're
to.
definitely
It's
comfortable.
less of a cultural, I don't want to say baggage, but cultural infrastructure.
Yes, yes. But I'm hoping now that Australians have sort of seen the value in migrants, that they'll be a little bit more understanding and welcoming and appreciative.
Yeah, so obviously there are lots of housing pressures here, and
Yes.
there is resistance to having high density places full of unfamiliar people.
Yes.
And but I understand we have the most foreign-born population of a large country.
Really?
Yeah, more than New Zealand, more than Canada, way more than the US. So there are small countries like Dubai and Singapore. Out of sizable countries, I think we're number one. I think Canada's catching up really fast.
Which is?
Canada.
Okay. Yeah.
So let's dive in. I did promise our viewers, we've had enough of a conversation already, but I did promise the viewers a bit of Microburbs.
Yes, please.
So this is the new Microburbs that has yet to be launched, very soon to be launched.
Awesome.
So we've got a lot more data. Things, we've got our lifestyle scores and such already. You've got the ability to drill down on things now.
Oh, you've got a lot more tabs there. Vehicles per household, that's new. Bicycle commuter, wow.
Yep. So a lot of places, particularly in lifestyle actually, but of most interest for this conversation is going to be people and culture. Let's go for somewhere a little bit more where a migrant will be interested in. So here we've got internal migration, arrivals.
Wow.
So it should actually be opposite. So that blue should be up there. So the blue places actually have more internal migrants.
Okay. Yes, definitely further up the coast. I'm seeing that for sure.
And here's our religions.
Yeah. That's amazing, Luke.
No religion, Buddhism. And we've split that second gen one needs fixing, but there's third generation Australians.
Wow.
Where are they? Red actually means low amounts. So you can see that should be flipped around. You can see the trend over time as well. So you can see that Sydney now has more third gen since 2016. And yeah, so as you go out, you can see more blue, which is actually max versus the city.
Yes.
And within here, so we've got our languages. So we've got sort of groups. Yeah, let's see how that's working. So
it would be a fair
English only.
English only.
So the so the red actually means low numbers of English only. So, and the blue, so it's getting more so you're seeing up here in the Northern Beaches,
yes,
you have more people that only speak English. It's a more of a Anglo part. European languages. So you can see.
Amazing. This is going to be hugely welcoming and just, you know, I was saying earlier, just having the correct facts for people. It's amazing. Wow.
So yeah, a number of Turks, not that many in Bondi, as it turns out. Persian, Arabs, religion, education.
Okay, so you've got
the uni grads. What kinds of degrees do people have?
Wow.
So we've got less science degrees in the southwest of the city.
That's powerful.
Similar, it's going to be, yes, a similar pattern for other ones. Yeah, we've got your health degrees near the Royal North Shore Hospital.
Okay, yes, of course.
Business, arts, youth allowance, all kinds of stuff. Indigenous population, not going to be massive for Sydney.
No. Age.
A real big age breakdown. So you've got, you can see how Bondi ranks. So obviously it's quite a young place. So you can see that it ranks well for your millennials, Gen Zs.
Is that 17%? It's a bit blurred on my side. I think it's 17.
That's right. Oh, yeah. I'll probably make this a bit bigger, hey? I don't know what resolution it's coming out at.
Yeah.
And yet your places of worship, overall, obviously real estate as well. Very high affluence score in Bondi.
Yes.
You get your growth over time. You want to see where's gone up.
Incredible.
And
you've made it so user-friendly as well. It's
thank you.
Absolutely amazing.
You're able to click on these and then compare, but for the suburb as well.
Yeah.
For the suburb, for the entire metropolitan in this case.
Oh, I'm so excited.
So breakdown, where have the units or the houses?
Yes.
So like here you can see this is an area of change. You mentioned before how different parts of changed over time in Australia. So coming back 20 years, a lot more of Sydney has units, particularly along main roads.
Yes.
Break down by how big the units are, how big the blocks are, development applications. So where are the swimming pools? Say you want to be, your kids love the pool and you want to find out where there'll be lots of play dates with pools. If you don't want to have your own one.
Yes. Well, even for migrants, because some of them don't swim yet. So it's actually a big thing for me is where the local swimming pools are so that they can swim.
Yes. That's a good one.
Yeah.
New developments, planning applications.
Goodness me. And it's an interesting one, even the religion, because that can be quite a driving force for a lot of migrants, whether there's a mosque nearby or, and that is probably feedback that I get a lot is how non-religious Australian is. But we have a lot of diversity within the different organizations and the different churches. But actual Australians, we're not a very religious bunch.
No, even compared to Canadians.
Really?
Yeah. So Canadians have much higher levels of Christianity than we do.
Really? Yeah. Yeah, I wouldn't think that Australia ranks very highly across the world, to be honest. So that's interesting to a lot of migrants when they arrive.
We have a bit of a skeptical mindset.
Yes.
We don't take things too seriously a lot of the time.
No.
We're not reverent.
New developments, general. Okay. Wow. So what have you got under environment?
So we have our tranquility scores, of course.
Okay. Yep.
So again, blue means good. So blue is the tranquil areas. So you see the North Shore show up strongly there.
Yes.
Rainfall. So there is actually quite a difference in rainfall. If you like the rain. Pollution. We have a lot more pollution data coming up, actually.
Really? And again, that's for migrants, it depends where they're coming from, whether they are interested in that. But I do have a lot that I'd say, especially hay fever sufferers.
That's a good one. Yeah. I'm pretty sure we have that coming. So yeah, obviously Australia overall is not crime ridden and there's not that much pollution, but it is actually, there are certain areas like south of Sydney where you've got power generation where that could be in effect. Maybe if you've got a predilection to a certain kind of cancer, if you've got that in the family, you might want to know. And so we've got pollution by chemical coming up.
Wow, that's incredible. I'm so excited. There is just so much information people can access. And, for me, it's just wonderful because I want people to access it. I want people to educate themselves. I just want to cry when people haven't even done any research. So this is just amazing. Oh, look at that. Long-term conditions.
This one was interesting to me.
Wow.
So mental health condition, including anxiety and depression. So blue should be high here. So you can see that it's the inner west that really suffers from depression and anxiety. For our
Wow.
non-Sydney people, that's like a hip part of town.
Mm.
So they left-wing and metropolitan, not so leafy sort of area, but kind of area that is associated with what kind of people you find in Melbourne.
Yeah.
And they've got some mental issues. So this sort of stuff feeding into livability scores is quite interesting.
I think my job's going to be turned on its head now, because everybody's going to have this information, and then they're going to be asking me, but I don't want to live there because they're going to have a stroke. So I'm going to have to manage expectations in a whole other way now.
Yeah. We like to say one in a certain number. Yeah. So if it's one in 1,000, it still might not move the needle. But of course, you have to control by age as well. So obviously, a place like Hunters Hill that has an older population is going to have more of most health problems.
Interesting. And even though you say, I mean, I know for the average Australian, crime might not be something that they would look at. I do have a lot of people who, just about all the migrants, I would say 95% of my needs analysis say a low crime area, because they're coming from a high crime.
Yeah. I'll just pause as I go back to you. Where are you? Hang on a sec. And we're back. Yes.
So awesome. Very awesome.
Yes. I have a meeting now, I'm afraid. So I do have to get going. But thank you very much, Robyn. I think you've really kicked off the podcast in style. I think this has been very interesting. I'm impressed at how much we've been able to cover and how much knowledge you have. And I'd be interested to have you on again later to get the update on what kind of people are filling the country and how they're enjoying it.
That would be awesome. I've really enjoyed chatting with you, Luke. Thank you. As always, we can sit for hours, but we both need to run along. So thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it, and I'm super excited. Good luck with the launch, and I'll be watching out.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Luke.
Thank you.
See you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks for listening to the Microburbs podcast. If you have any questions for Luke or our guest, please place them in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more great content coming soon.